Coach Abel here along with Coach Weiss, the Able Body Experts, and we're doing a little mini series here on why diets fail. And we're trying to give you as much as we can in a little video clip. Obviously we can't get all that done in a couple minutes of a video clip. But we want to talk to you about why diets fail, self-sabotage, things like that. If you've seen the other parts of this series, then you know we're talking about reward centers of the brain. But now I want to talk to you something else. Stress. Everyone can tell you that almost all causes of diet sabotage or eating for relief from stress, they're modern day issues. Okay, these didn't happen before because of the availability of food. So I want to talk to you about the concept of food rehab. And what that means, I'm going to give you an example that a lot of you can relate to. Remember that the brain seeks reward and pleasure. It doesn't seek conflict. In the triangle of awareness, all these diet gurus out there who are trying to give you diet solutions to non-diet issues. This is a mental and emotional battle that goes on with your brain. For instance, people have trouble that they repeat the behaviors of sabotaging their diets, okay? So what happens, Coach, is they start dieting, they're losing a little weight, and you and I know what happens when your hunger cues and arousal levels to eat go up.
Yeah.
So without the mental and emotional ammunition to deal with that, they're stuck in the same cycle that we talked about in part one. Their arousal levels to the cues around them to eat go up. So what happens is they start with psychological negotiating between the emotion to eat for pleasure or dull the pain, all right, versus the mental anguish of self-sabotage. So they have a battle going on. Well, the brain is always going to work to do what? To remedy any kind of battle. So if you're stressing in your mind about food, should I eat or shouldn't I eat? Should I go to the fridge or shouldn't I go to the fridge? Should I stick to my diet or should I go out for dinner with the Joneses down the street? Once you start having that conflict, what do you think is going to be the only thing that relieves that conflict? The actual eating is going to be the thing that relieves the conflict. So you actually start using food as a source of stress itself because you're always debating in your head about food. I'm going to feel guilty if I eat, shameful if I eat. So the actual process that starts and begins that circle is one where you actually can only get relief from that pressure of food by actually eating. So eventually you might resist eating once, twice, 3 times. Eventually you're going to eat because your brain doesn't deal with that conflict. It has to release the conflict. And the way it does that is you end up sabotaging yourself so the brain, at least momentarily, has dealt with the arousal levels of being hungry. Now, we have to think of that in terms of food rehab. So the solution to that isn't another diet. I get out of my brain angry, Coach, these days with all these diet gurus telling people, oh, the reason they do that is their nutrient timing is off, or their carbs are stimulating their hunger, or
their insulin levels are being spiked.
Insulin levels are spiking, or their insulin levels or blood sugar's too low. Balderdash. This has to do with the triangle of awareness where the metabolic part of it is the smaller part of the equation. The even side of that triangle of the mental and emotional battle you have with yourself, that food is now actually the stress issue. So going to a food expert to deal with a problem that's non-food related is going to lead nowhere. So actually, you create stress about your diet by thinking that it has to be more and more complicated, more and more micromanaged, and that stress, once you start losing weight, that you have for the cues to eat, remember the hunger acronym from earlier, and then what happens is the only way you can actually relieve that stress is by actually sabotaging and eating the thing you're trying to avoid to begin with. It becomes a vicious circle of emotional eating, and only emotional awareness of your cues is going to satisfy that. All the more reason coaching is imperative. If you ever want to solve eating issues or weight problems, it's going to be through food rehab, not another diet, Coach.
Yeah, and that's the thing that'll happen too, and you had mentioned it earlier, is with, everybody starts off very strong on when they're it's easy on everyone. How many times have you heard people be excited about starting a eating diet? And then, like you mentioned, how far in, it's different for everybody, but the negotiation starts inside their own mind. Eventually that you negotiated to a point where it's okay to eat.
Yes.
Then you have the guilt about what you did, and the cycle comes back around. It's easy again to follow the diet for a few days. Then you start to negotiate. Then you stress, and
Right.
it just goes round and round and round.
And it goes round and round because you don't understand how urges neurally generate the emotional response. Okay, whether that's for food or other emotional issues, diet's not going to solve it. Again, as you start to drop body fat, metabolically, hormonally, things happen to increase your hunger, which exposes you more to the arousal level of the cues around you. This is all emotional, not metabolic. And unless you have the tools to deal with that, you're going to continue to sabotage your diet. As Coach says, I get people that join with me all the time and they're like, well, I knew I was starting my diet from you, so I had one last blowout for 2 days on the weekend.
Yeah.
And then they still don't get through a whole week of dieting, even
Yeah.
though they've got an actual diet. And the reason is they haven't negotiated food issues. So what's required is food rehab, not a diet. And I talk a lot about this in my summer workbook, the workshop workbook from 2010 on my webpage. So, Coach, anything you want to add in terms of being stressed about actually eating and food rehab?
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that people make their own situations worse and worse and worse. The smaller and smaller the details become that they're stressing about. When people can let
The more
go,
likely failure is.
yeah, they can get when people can let go of that worrying about every single aspect of every single nutrient of every single chemical reaction that's happening inside their body from everything they're doing.
Right.
The more they're worrying about that, the more they're causing themselves more stress, and the more they end up going around in that circle. And food becomes the food and the diet itself becomes what
Another source of stress.
Yeah, and it's basically what's sabotaging them.
Right.
It's not the actual food itself; it's the actual diet.
You actually end up eating to relieve the stress that you've created about eating. And that's the whole purpose of this Coach 'em Up. Requires coaching expertise in the triangle of awareness in terms of addressing people's psychological response to the acronym of hunger. And this has been a Coach 'em Up on why diets fail.